Much for joining us for our Lunch and Learn session on PowerPoint Accessibility 101. This session is part of a series of trainings focused on digital accessibility. And really our goal with these trainings is to heighten awareness amongst UCSF staff, faculty, and learners around the importance of ensuring that our presentation materials are accessible to people with disabilities and that we're creating accessible learning environments for all. My name is Cecile Puretz, and I joined UCSF in 2022 as the Assistant Director of Disability Access and Inclusion in the Office of Diversity and Outreach. A core function of my role is to provide guidance around accessible in-person, hybrid, and virtual event policies and practices. This also includes the creation of the UCSF Toolkit for Accessible Events, which includes tips and strategies for UCSF constituents who are planning events with accessibility in mind from the very beginning. I also facilitate Disability 101 trainings to raise awareness around disability access and inclusion across the UCSF enterprise. Another core function of my role is to produce disability cultural events and programs. And lastly, I manage the Resource Center for Disability Access and Inclusion, which is a dedicated space on the Parnassus campus for UCSF staff, faculty, learners with disabilities, and their allies to build community. So before I launch into our agenda for today's session, I'd like to briefly share the mission and purpose of the Office of Disability Access and Inclusion. Our office was founded in 2021 in an effort to ensure an accessible and inclusive community for people with disabilities to work, learn, visit, and receive healthcare at UCSF. Our office facilitates education and training around disability and accessibility policies and practices. We provide programs that affirm disability culture, identity, intersectional identities, and health equity. And lastly, our Chief Accessibility and Inclusion Officer, Dr. Wendy Tobias, offers services for UCSF constituents who have disability-related grievances related to UCSF policies, programs, and services. So now, moving on to our agenda. First, we're going to learn about the importance of document accessibility, and what do we mean by that? We're going to learn about how to use and find accessible templates. We're also going to learn about how to use the built-in accessibility checker to check for errors in our PowerPoint. I will also share some tips on how to use slide design, fonts, and colors to maximize access. We're also going to learn about the importance of reading order and why it's so important to make sure that it is correctly formatted in the intended order. Then we're going to briefly review how to describe images and really any visual content in your presentation. Then I'm going to share some best practices for making an accessible hyperlink. And finally, we're going to wrap up by saving our PowerPoint file in a PDF format and how to ensure that we carry over all of the accessibility tags in our final document. So I'm using Microsoft 365 today. So if you have another version of Microsoft, the options we're looking at may look slightly different than, but all of the items we're discussing should be available. If you cannot find the accessibility features I'm talking about, I'm happy to connect with you and provide some one-on-one support offline. All right. So to start off, we're going to be learning about the importance of document accessibility. And what do we mean when we say that? So the first thing is to make sure that our document is compatible for folks who use screen readers. And you might be wondering, what is a screen reader? So simply put, a screen reader is a generic term for a program that helps people who are blind or low vision use a computer. So a screen reader will either read or speak the content of a page to the user, or alternately, it can be transferred to a Braille display. So I also want to mention that other folks might choose to use a screen reader as well. So for example, perhaps you learn better through auditory learning. So that's another reason you may use a screen reader. So next, we want to make sure that our PowerPoint is easy for people who use a screen reader to navigate. So when we're looking at reading order is going to be particularly important in this category, because as I mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that our reading order of our slides is very clear and organized in the way that we intended it to be. So next, we're going to make sure that we really want to clearly convey meaning in our presentation. And what this is referring to is if we have any visual content, images, tables, or graph, that they're clearly described using a feature called alternative text. So also, I wanted to share UCSF's web accessibility statement. A reminder that really it is everyone's responsibility to ensure that our digital documents and platform are accessible. So UCSF is committed to providing an online environment that is accessible to everyone, including individuals with visual, auditory, motor, or cognitive disabilities. Improving accessibility benefits all of us by helping to improve search engine optimization, SEO, future-proof content, and promote a model of inclusivity. And I've included a link to the UCSF Digital Accessibility website here. Okay, so we're going to be looking at finding and using accessible templates. So UCSF Brand Identity provides PowerPoint presentation templates that are available to download. So these are pre-designed slides that are formatted for accessibility. So just to keep in mind, when you do make a lot of changes to an existing template, you may lose some of the built-in accessibility features. So just keep that in mind as you're designing. And I've included a link here to the UCSF Brand Identity presentation templates. So next, we're going to be talking about the PowerPoint Accessibility Checker. So PowerPoint includes a tool that will help to identify, and this is a built-in tool, many of the common accessibility issues. So this would inspect your presentation for any elements that would potentially cause barriers for people with disabilities who rely on screen readers. The Accessibility Checker built-in tool is also available in Microsoft Word, Outlook on the web, and Excel. So this is a feature you can use across multiple platforms. So now I'm going to show you two different ways that you can find your PowerPoint Accessibility Checker, the built-in tool. So the first option is that we're going to go over to our top ribbon, and we're going to look for the Review tab. We're going to click on Review, and then if we look all the way to the left, we're going to notice a Check Accessibility pane. And it reads, let us make sure that your file follows accessibility best practices. We'll help you fix issues quickly with easy to follow directions or recommendations. So I'm going to click on that. And what we will notice is on the right-hand side of our pane appears our accessibility inspection results. And we'll come back to those in just a few moments. So I'm going to close out of that, and I'm going to show you a second way that you can access your checker. So we're going to head again back up to our top ribbon, and we're actually going to go to File as if we're creating a new document, a new presentation. I'm going to click on File, and here I'm looking for Info on the far left. So I'm going to click on Info, and then I'm going to go for Inspect Presentation. And I'm going to click on Check Issues and select the Check Accessibility. And again, we notice on the right-hand pane appears our inspection results. So those are two ways that you can find the accessibility checker. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a good practice to keep your checker open as you're designing your presentation. So I'm going to stay into presentation mode. And now we're going to talk about the inspection results that appear in our on the right-hand pane. So inspection results are grouped into four larger categories. The first one is errors. And so if I hover over errors, it tells us that errors identify issues that can make it unusable for people with disabilities. So we definitely want to make sure that we remediate those. Examples of errors, as you can see from the list here, are missing alternative text. So some images in our presentation do not include a description. And we also have missing slide titles. So now we're going to move on to our second category is warnings. So warnings, if we hover over it, Warnings identify issues that can make it very difficult for people with disabilities to navigate your document. And an example of warnings is check reading order. So here we've identified slide 13 is giving us a warning that the slide reading order is incorrect. Next, the third category is tips. So I'm going to scroll down, tips, hover over it. Tips identify issues that can be changed to make your presentation a better accessibility experience. So the thing to remember about tips is that they don't necessarily flag issues that are not comprehensible or not accessible, but they rather, they provide some strategies for improving the user experience. And one example of that will be that duplicate slide titles. So on slide 17, we have duplicate slide titles. So we'll want to make sure we have a unique slide title for each slide. And now the fourth category, which I'm going to scroll down, is called intelligent services. So intelligent services is powered by AI, artificial intelligence, and helps to automatically generate alt text. And it'll provide suggestions that help you design more accessible content for your images. I do want to share a quick disclaimer is that intelligent services does not always provide the most accurate description of images. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. So now the goal of our presentation, as I mentioned earlier, is to fix all of our accessibility issues. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So the first item is in our errors list is missing alternative text. So this is telling us that the image on this slide here that as a sighted person, I can see, but if I was blind or low vision, or just simply maybe I'm driving and I am on the phone. And so including a description here is a really important way to make it accessible. So here it tells us missing alternate text on picture 8. So to add alt text to an image, it's quite simple. You're in your presentation, you're going to right click on your mouse, excuse me, and you're going to scroll down to edit alt text. So I'm going to edit alt text, and here on the right appears a text box. So in the text box, you would describe in 1 to 3 sentences, maybe 200 words or less, the subject of the image in detail, perhaps the setting or any relevant information that you want to convey. So here I'm going to go ahead and type in some text. So I'm going to start by saying person typing on a laptop, holding a cell phone, period. And maybe I want to add something that it's in an office setting. Office, holding a cell phone in their hand. So here you don't even need to do, save it. You just click out of the box. Now, I did mention earlier around generating alt text, and we'll be reviewing that in just a few moments. So now I'm going to click out of that. And I'm going to close my alt text pane. And now you'll notice that under the errors, alt text has now been removed since we fixed the issue. So once you fix the issue, it'll automatically be removed from your list of inspection results. Okay, so next we are going to move on to another error, which is our missing slide title. So I'm going to click on the missing slide title, and it's going to move me to the slide which needs to be remediated. So it says click slide 12. And here it says missing slide title. So I'm going to enter it. And here it looks like the subject of this slide is always use unique slide titles. So I'll call it unique slide titles. Great. So now our inspection results fixed that error. Okay. Okay. Now we're going to go back to our accessibility checker. And now we're going to move on to checking reading order. This is under warnings. So let's go to slide 13. So to check reading order, we're going to very simply verify under warnings the object order. And so as I mentioned earlier, PowerPoint is not always automatically set up. So here, if I click, this is the order that it's currently displaying as. So it's showing my footer, it's showing my slide number, then it's showing my title, my content placeholder, and icon. So if you're someone who's relying on a screen reader and cannot physically see the slides, this is how the information is going to read. Footer, slide number, title, and really that's inaccurate, right? So as a sighted person, I'm reading the slide from top to bottom. I'm scanning for images visually. But again, a person who uses a screen reader is really going to rely on you as the designer to organize the items in the intended order. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to physically reorganize them. So we want to start with a title. So here, if you click on title, you can either drag it up to the first place, or you can use these up and down arrows to help move it into the preferred order. So we'll start with our title. I don't have a subtitle here, but you would probably do that next. We want our content slide holder. So now I'll use the arrows to show you how I do that. Then we want to make sure that our image is in there as well, and make sure that your images have alt text. And then for footer and placeholder for slide number, I'll usually remove those since they're not necessarily essential. Okay, so now we've seen under our errors, our warnings, that the reading order has been resolved. And just to note, reading order, you may have your entire deck to redo, depending on how customized you've created it. So now we're going to go under tips. Now remember, tips are not necessarily inaccessible, but they're really about improving the user experience. So the recommendation here was to edit our slide title. So we had 2 slides with the same title links. So you may want to, so here, when you're creating a unique slide title, you may want to delineate it by slide number 1, slide number 2. So use some kind of a numeric form. So here I'm going to call it hyperlink. Okay. So then that removes it from our list of inspection results. Next, we're going to be talking about the intelligence services that we mentioned here in our inspection results. So it's giving us some suggested alternative text. And remember, earlier in the presentation, I reminded you to always verify the auto-generated description. So here, it's bringing me to my initial slide, the Lunch and Learn image. And the auto-generated alt text here says a picture containing text, comma, orange. And then it says description automatically generated. I'm not really happy or satisfied with this description, so I'm going to edit it. So you just basically erase it, and then you can say text or graphic with text that reads Lunch Learn, period, in the background. Is a person typing on a laptop, period. So again, just the essential information. If for any reason you want to mark this image as decorative, I can show you how to do that in just a moment. So now I'm going to close out of that. And now it's telling us no accessibility issues have been found. People with disabilities should not have difficulty reading this presentation. So I'm going to close out of that, and I'm going to share a couple more. I'll scroll through my document. So I wanted to talk for a moment about auto-generated alt text, that feature in intelligence services that we just discussed. It's important. I would say generally it's recommended not to use this feature as is. I think if you do use the automated alt text, it's really important to review the quality and the accuracy of the auto-generated descriptions. And while this feature, AI, whether it's AI captions or AI alternative text, have made a lot of progress, I think they do not meet accessibility compliance standards. So again, always review those generated descriptions. Another feature that I wanted to discuss with you is decorative images. So a decorative image may be a stylistic border that surrounds your presentation, or maybe I wouldn't necessarily consider a logo a decorative item. So really it's anything that doesn't necessarily convey any important meaning. So you would want to mark that as decorative option in the alt text pane to identify images that should be ignored by someone who uses assistive technology. So again, decorative images add visual interest, but they're not informative. And people, as they're who use ScreenReader, as they're navigating the document, will hear that the image is tagged as decorative, so they know that they aren't missing any important information. Now, moving on, we talked a little bit about hyperlinks. It's really important to create descriptive and concise hyperlink. Remember, if we're a ScreenReader user and we have a really long link with lots of letters and characters, the ScreenReader is literally going to read that as it is. So links should be descriptive and concise. Another tip is avoid click here or link here. Using that text is difficult for screen readers to know where they're being brought to with the link. So really, when you're creating a link, you may want to be very descriptive in saying, link to the Disability Allies newsletter, and then include your hyperlink. Another tip is to use shorteners such as tinyURL or bit.ly, and UCSF does have a UCSF tinyURL link that you can use to shorten your link. So continuing with hyperlinks, to create a hyperlink in your text, we're simply, and I'm going to use this as an example below, you're going to highlight your text. So I'm going to take this text, subscribe to the Disability Allies newsletter, and then you're going to right click and you're going to insert your link here in this box, the address. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to copy my link, and I'm going to right click, and then I'm going to pop it into the address box. And then all of a sudden it should illuminate here in blue, and it's underlined. Another key thing to remember is avoid doing too much underlining in your documents and presentations. Underlining should really be reserved for hyperlinks and links. So now we're still in demonstration mode. I want to show you another feature. We've talked about a lot of different items and themes. One that we have not yet talked about is making sure that the color contrast. Color can have a significant impact on how people with disabilities are navigating your document. So I'm going to show you one way that you can check for your color contrast. There are actually, I included a resource here, WebAIM does include an online free color contrast checker. So I will make sure to include the link here so that you can actually test it yourself. Another method is to use the color grayscale feature. So we're actually going to go to, at the top ribbon under View, and there are 3 items here under the color grayscale. So we're going to choose grayscale. So in this feature, if you find it difficult to view properly, it means that your color contrast is not sufficient. And essentially color contrast, a good color contrast is between the background and the text, that they're clearly distinguished. So I'm going to use the grayscale. And here this has actually converted my presentation into black and white. And so because this is actually telling me that I do have good color contrast, I have a dark blue background with white text. So you would want to inspect your presentation using this tool. So now we're going to click back to color view now that we've confirmed our color contrast. Now we're moving now towards, now that we've fixed all of our accessibility errors, we are going to think about now saving our presentation into a PDF format. So the really important takeaway here is that we do not want to print to PDF. So folks usually go, you may be used to going to print and print as PDF. But that's not what we want to do. And the reason why is because this method of printing to PDF does not preserve the document structure and will result in a PDF that does not have any accessibility tabs. So all of the hard work that you did to use your checker, to remediate your reading order, add image descriptions will be lost. So to avoid that, I'm going to share on this next slide deck a way that you can create an accessible PDF, and it's quite simple. So from the File menu, okay, we are going to Save As. And here under Save As, I'm going to, your title, and then you're going to go to PowerPoint, and then you're going to scroll down to PDF, and then you'll click Save. So once you do it in that method, now I'm going to go back, that method will preserve the accessibility tabs. So I did include a little warning sign here, is that users of PowerPoint for Mac should know that exporting to PDF will not necessarily yield an accessible tagged PDF document. It must be remediated using Acrobat Pro. So those are just a couple of tips. Now, before we run our accessibility checker one last time to make sure that we fixed everything, I did want to give you one additional tip, is how to add a title to your presentation. So all of us typically, when we're saving a document, will just include a title and a location of where to save it and the format that we want. But there's another feature where you can give your presentation a title that will be recognized by people who use screen readers. So we're going to go back to our file as if we're creating a new document. And then we're going to go to Info. And here on the right-hand side, we have a list of properties. And right here, there is a box that usually will be empty. And when it's empty, it doesn't give information to people who use screen readers. So what we're going to do is we're going to title it. We're going to say Lunch and Learn PowerPoint 101, PowerPoint Accessibility. And then when you click out of it, it'll automatically save. So this is a feature that a lot of people usually forget about, but it is a great tool for maximizing, a tip for maximizing accessibility. So I'm going to go back to my presentation and I'm going to run the checker one last time. So again, I'm going to the top tab ribbon. I'm going to go check accessibility, and here my inspection results give me great news. No accessibility issues found. People with disabilities should not have difficulty reading this presentation. I'm going to close out of that. And now that concludes our demonstration portion of our presentation. I now would like to share some of the resources that are available to you in the Office of Disability Access and Inclusion. So as I mentioned earlier, part of my role is to provide guidance and support for anyone at UCSF who has questions around designing accessible in-person, remote, or hybrid events. I've included a QR code, which will take you to a consultation request form. I am available for 30-minute consultations as you're designing your events. If you have questions, if you need information on how to run the accessibility checker, I am available to support you. And then lastly, I also want to put in a plug for my colleague, Jill Walters, who is the Digital Accessibility Program Manager in IT Web Services, who is a wonderful resource who offers digital accessibility office hours. And these are monthly interactive virtual sessions where you can learn best practices around digital accessibility. And they're also particularly useful for website owners. Jill also has a testing websites with users with disabilities, where she works with a consultant who is blind and uses screen reader technology. So it really provides a sort of firsthand experience of what it is like to navigate a UCSF website or document using a screen reader. So that concludes our training for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, my name is Cecile Puretz. I'm your Assistant Director of Disability Access Inclusion. I've included a QR code which will bring you to our Disability Allies newsletter, a monthly newsletter for updates on programs, events, and resources in our office. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you.